There we go.
Perfect.
Yep, so you should get a message. Thank you so much. So Julia Chase and Kelley Del Real are here to talk about our Emerald study, or their Emerald study for DEEs, including CHD2. So welcome, Julia and Kelley.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Kelley, I can introduce myself first if you'd like. So my name's Julia Chase. I work in patient engagement and advocacy here at Praxis, and I've been here for around 4 years. Kelley will be presenting today, so I'll pull up some slides, but like Marnie said, feel free to add your questions in the chat. We tend to like to hold our questions to the end so we can stop the recording and open it up for families to feel very comfortable asking any questions that are on their mind. So without further ado, I will pull up the slides and let Kelley introduce herself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kelley Del Real. I met many of you when we presented at the CHD2 conference a few months back. I'm the Director of Patient Strategy and Program Execution in our epilepsy teams. More importantly, I have a son with a DEE. His name's Connor. He's 16. He has an SEN2A mutation, which is why I got into industry about 10 years ago. And now I get to work on programs for children with epilepsy like my son and like many in this community. So we have a study right now, the Emerald study. This meeting today is for you. We're going to present some information, but really encourage you to ask any question, any point that we review that's unclear. And like was mentioned earlier, we'll stop the recording so that it feels like a safe atmosphere and anyone can ask any question on their mind. Our mission statement at Praxis is really about speed for DEE patients. There are several of us that work at Praxis that have a child with epilepsy. So we're constantly asking ourselves, how can we go faster to deliver new medications to these patients? We understand that every day matters. And Praxis is an epilepsy company. So we have one program that's featured here that is for movement disorders. All other programs in our pipeline are epilepsy programs. We have two platforms. The first is called Cerebrum, and these are all small molecule drugs. This is relutrigine on this platform, which we'll be focusing on today. Our second platform is called Solidus, and these are antisense oligonucleotides, or ASOs, programs for specific genes. And I know for my son, I have trialed so many different anti-seizure medications with him in the 16 years that he's had epilepsy. And after the first few, really didn't have a whole lot of hope that the next medication or next sodium channel blocker would really be effective in reducing his seizures. But I really want to make it clear today that relutrigine is a very different type of medication. It's in the class of sodium channel blockers, but it is a sodium channel modulator, and it's selective to the hyperactive neuron. And what that means is traditional sodium channel blockers, they're blocking sodium channels all of the time. Relutrigine is selective to the hyperactive neuron, which means when neurons are functioning normally, it leaves those neurons untouched. So we don't have constant sodium channel blockade like we experience with what's currently available in the class of sodium channel blockers. There's no titration needed whatsoever for relutrigine. So some medications we have to slowly titrate up over a series of weeks or even months to get to a therapeutic level and then assess if the medication is going to be efficacious. With relutrigine, the dose you start at is the dose that you stay at, and you will be able to tell pretty quickly if there's going to be efficacy with this medication. It has a very long half-life, about 5 days, which means the medication only has to be administered once per day. The half-life is so long that if you accidentally forget to administer medication for 1 day, it is not even going to affect the levels. The formulation for this trial is a liquid formulation, which means it can be administered orally or by G or J tube. And then there's no added sugars, so it's ketogenic diet friendly for those patients on the keto diet. And want to touch on and explain the different phases of drug development and where we are with relutrigine. So In drug development, you typically have to start with a phase 1 study, and this is with healthy volunteers. So it's not the patient population that you're looking to eventually go into. These are healthy volunteers where the medication is first trialed. And with relutrigine in our phase 1 study, we had 130 healthy volunteers in this first phase. And based on the data that came out of that phase 1 study, we were then able to move into a patient population. So our first phase 2 study was called the EMBOLD study. And this was a small cohort of SCN2A and SCN8A patients where EMBOLD was trialed. When we did an interim data cut of this study, the data was so positive that what we did is we modified the protocol to add a second cohort for a phase 2/3 study with more patients. And that's happening and almost fully enrolled right now. And then in parallel, we just opened a few months ago a phase 3 study for a broader DEE subset of patients, and that's the EMERALD trial. And I just want to make it really clear. This is the last trial that we'll be needing to do for relutrigine, the EMERALD clinical trial. And assuming the data is positive, after the end of this trial, and we seek to get approval for this medication, that takes several years. So new patients would not be able to access relutrigine for several years until we get approval and it's commercially available where a physician could actually write a prescription for this. So this phase 3 study of EMERALD is really the last opportunity for patients to trial relutrigine that are interested in. And to touch on the EMBOLD study, again, this is with SCN2A and SCN8A patients. Patients in this trial could remain on their current anti-seizure medication. So they were on the best possible anti-seizure medications that they had access to, and then relutrigine was added on top of that. And when we did the first interim data cut, so this is the 4-month mark, the end of the double-blind period, we saw a 46% median seizure reduction in these patients, which SCN2A and 8A patients tend to have a high seizure burden. So we were very excited by this result. And when we did the second interim data cut, and this is the 11th month mark, so patients on relutrigine for 11 months, we saw a median 90% seizure reduction in these patients. And this is really the opposite of what we tend to see with many anti-seizure medications, where there can be a honeymoon period in the beginning, and patients might experience efficacy early on for the first few weeks or first few months. And then for whatever reason, the medication stops working as it did in the beginning. With relutrigine, we're seeing the longer patients are on it, the better seizure control gets, which is great. There were no serious adverse events due to drug in the trial, and there were no patients that required any kind of dose reduction from any side effect. In addition to the daily seizure diary, we also utilized a scale called the CGI, and this was to assess other improvements seen when relutrigine was taken. So we looked at 4 specific domains, and this is being carried through to the EMERALD study as well. We looked at disruptive behavior, and this is whatever the patient is experiencing at the baseline. So on the day of screening, at the beginning of the trial, it could be agitation or irritability, whatever the disruptive behavior is unique to the patient. We looked at communication. Again, what's the baseline of the patient? Are they verbal? Do they communicate with an assisted device? Perhaps there's no communication whatsoever. We looked at seizure severity and intensity. So how often is rescue medication being administered? Are the seizures clustering? How long are they lasting? And then we looked at alertness. This is around awareness, or how present is the child with caregivers and those around them. And this scale was administered on day 1 of screening, so the beginning of the study, to the clinician and also to the caregiver. And then we assessed these same domains again at the end of the double-blind period, so 4 months. And as you can see, there were significant improvements in all the domains, according to both the caregiver and the clinician. So we're considering relutrigine to have disease-modifying properties. It's affecting more than just a reduction in seizures. And with regard to relutrigine, it has a much broader applicability than just patients with a sodium channel mutation. So regardless of the root cause of the disease, whether it's a SCN2A mutation or SYNGAP1 or CHD2 or LGS, whatever diagnosis is the root cause of all of the symptoms, any manifestation of a seizure has to pass through the sodium channels for a seizure to actually occur. And this is the precise place where relutrigine acts on the hyperactive sodium channels. And the expectation is then you're going to have a decrease in seizures, or seizures would not occur. So neurons that are firing too fast or too often, a seizure is about to happen, relutrigine steps in and in theory normalizes those neurons. So this is why we've started the EMERALD trial to assess relutrigine in a much broader patient population. And then we've trialed relutrigine in a pretty large library of different animal models. So we have data in SCN2A and 8A animal models. And then I want to also specifically call out SCN1A mutation. Sodium channel blockers are typically contraindicated because they can worsen seizure severity and intensity. But with relutrigine, when we trialed in an SCN1A mouse model and a fish model, we saw the opposite, where there was a significant reduction in seizures. So it just further illustrates relutrigine has a very unique mechanism of action. And then we trialed it in some other different genetic epilepsy models as well, and there was efficacy across the board. The EMERALD trial design, we have a very unique option for families. So when we were recruiting for the EMBOLD study, it was very slow to recruit. And in working with the different advocacy groups, it was communicated that there was high interest from families, but that travel was much too difficult for these medically fragile kids. And so we put our heads together at Praxis and tried to figure out, how do we remove travel for these families? How do we bring the trial to the family's home? And we were able to successfully offer that option for the EMBOLD study. And so we're carrying it through to EMERALD. So any family that's interested in participating in this current trial really has 3 different choices. You can participate fully remote from home and not have to leave your house for any aspect of the trial, or you can go like a traditional clinical trial to the study site and have all visits at the study site with the PI, or we're offering a third option, which we're calling a hybrid. So it's a mix of some study visits at home and some study visits at the site. If you do want to travel to a site, Praxis is able to cover the cost of all the study-related travel. But I'm going to talk about the study design here from the standpoint of choosing the fully at-home remote option, because that is what most families are choosing because it's such a low burden. So on the day of screening, this is where the PI or the principal investigator joins the study from telehealth. Another physician that's licensed in the patient's home state travels to the family's home together with a nurse that's licensed in that home state. All of the assessments, all of the labs, everything on that day of screening is done out of the family's home. Then for the next 28 days, the caregiver is just filling out a daily electronic seizure diary, and this is just an app that you download to your phone. If during that 28-day screening period, the patient has a minimum of 4 seizures and all of the labs are within normal range, then the patient is randomized into the trial. And for the next 16 weeks, there's a study visit once per month, and you're just filling out that daily electronic seizure diary. And then at the end of that 16 weeks of treatment, patients can move into what's called the open label extension. And what this means is there's no more placebo group and every patient is on relutrigine. The trial is randomized 1-to-1, which means in that double-blind treatment period, 50% of the patients will be on placebo and 50% of the patients will be on relutrigine. And then with regard to who can participate, so anyone with a diagnosis of a DEE, so anyone with a syndrome diagnosis or a genetic mutation that's epilepsy causing would qualify for this, together with any aspect of developmental delay. And then it's a pediatric through adult trial, so that means 2 to 65 years of age at the time of screening. And seizure onset just has to occur by 12 years of age. Patients need to have a minimum of 4 motor seizures a month to be eligible, and you're able to stay on your anti-seizure medication regimen, but no more than 2 of those medications can be true sodium channel blockers. There's no restriction on the number of total anti-seizure medications a patient can be taking. And then anyone that's interested in getting more information on the Emerald trial or screening, you would just go on resilientstudies.com. There's a page on that website on the Emerald trial. There's a little bit of the data that we talked about today. And you would put in a little bit of information about your child. So for example, their age, their diagnosis, how many seizures they're having per month. If all of the answers fit for the eligibility for the trial, then it will give you the ability to schedule a call with a nurse navigator at a time and a day that's convenient for you. And then the nurse will call you at that time and day of the scheduled call, get a little bit more in-depth information about the medications your child is taking, a true count of how many seizures per month, their age. If the patient is eligible, then the nurse navigator will do a warm handoff to the site. And within about 48 hours, the site will reach out to you. And that's your opportunity to then connect with the principal investigator on the study, to ask any more in-depth questions. You'll receive the informed consent and know all the different details of the study. And then a screening date can be scheduled if after learning all of that information, the family's still interested and feels like it's a good fit. And that was it on the information on the Emerald study, but I would anticipate there's a lot of different questions. So please feel free. Any question on some of the data we reviewed or any question that's specific to your child, like this is your opportunity to ask questions and then get answers in real time. Do we want to stop the recording for the Q&A?